All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Burning the Boats. Today, I have a very exciting guest by the name of Sunil Godse. Hopefully, I said the last name right. I was practicing for a while trying to get it correct. But I'm very excited to bring this guest on today's podcast for the reason being that he's going to talk about something that I feel is very near and dear to a lot of entrepreneurs. That kind of voice in the back of your head that's always kind of telling you go for it, or maybe that isn't the right decision, and how we actually take advice from this voice. So Sunil, thank you so much for being on today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's been a great week. Good start to the week, and the weekend was fantastic, nice and busy for me. And thanks for starting my week well with an excellent podcast series.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So let's go into it and talk about intuition. And I kind of want to go right into your backstory because it's something for me that I thought that was pretty fun and exciting. That you kind of you started off by wanting a video game and figuring out that was the moment that you wanted to become an entrepreneur, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And even if we back up even just before even getting that thought of thinking about, I mean, that was the first time that intuition had hit me when I was 5 years old. But the reason I started to dig into intuition, which funny enough, started from a business book. And so a lot of the research and everything is really business related. That got me to really dive into intuition. And after I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, the premise of that book is that if you were to read the stories of failure from others, then conceivably or conceptually, you should be able to succeed faster.
Yeah.
And so when I used to talk on stages around the world, the one question I kept getting was, okay, Sunil, come on, tell me the one thing. And I'm saying, oh my God, like I didn't come here with a cue card or a PDF sheet. Like this is a 400-page book. Like, come on. So but that question kept, there was something that was telling me to keep burning, go back. Why is this question burning in your head all the time? And then when I went to the audio recordings and when I specifically changed my focus on, okay, what's the characteristics of those that stayed at the failure stage versus those that succeeded as entrepreneurs. And very quickly, the diamond in the rough was that the people that stayed in the failure stage, or the difference between success and failure, were two things. One was not listening to their intuition. And the reason why they didn't listen to their intuition was because of the people that they listened to. So when those people took advice, the entrepreneurs took advice from others who had no interest in really kind of helping what the entrepreneur was doing, that led to some failures. And those who were able to overcome that failure were able to get the right mentors in place that were able to listen to themselves because they already had that experience, and they were able to succeed. And so this was sort of the birth of like thinking, okay, wow, like what is this thing called intuition? And so that's when I started reflecting back on my life. And so now if we go back to, let's look at my earliest time. There's these video games that my dad wanted me to buy, or I wanted my dad to buy, sorry. And he's clearly saying, no, dad, no, Sunil, they're just too expensive.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember this voice that was just saying, Sunil, that's not what you want to hear. Go door to door and raise money. And that's exactly what I did. I had my brother who was two and a half at the time, with his little diapers coming in, and we're going door to door, lots of milk and cookies, but we raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity because that felt really, really good. But what happened is that as you age, and this is what I noticed, is that there were a lot of these moments of success when I trusted my intuition. But when I looked at the failures that I had, the failures were a lot more recent than when I was at 5. And when I was at 5, that signal was so clear. And as I aged, there were so many other people that were influencing my life. As a South Asian male, my career was defined by me being a South Asian male. My advice was defined by others who gave me advice that didn't really care what I wanted. They never asked me what I wanted. Some traumatic events like going through my divorce, my parents went through, kind of hit me as well. And in some cases, we start living our lives, trying to prove others wrong. And so when we start living our lives through the judgment of others, through other people's lenses, we start to ignore our intuition. And so if I look at my failures that I had, that one of the first ones was, I mentioned the career, and there's 4 career doors as a South Asian male: is doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And I picked door number 3. became the engineer because my dad was an engineer. And so even though at 5 I was raising money, and everything I looked at doing apart from that, from that time,
Right.
was very entrepreneurial in nature. I had my first sales job when I was in engineering with no sales experience. And within a year, I was the top third in Western Canada in dollar per hour. And it wasn't necessarily because I was a superstar at sales, is because I knew how to develop trusted relationships with others, that they would come to me for their sales compared to the other salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of, again, there's that relationship building that is trusting, where intuition plays a real critical role in. And so I listened to my dad. I got into engineering and I hated it. And then 2 years in, I got a chance to become a private investor in a Mexican restaurant chain that was coming up to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And within a year, I was making 5 times more in dividends doing that than I was actually doing engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's these signals that are screaming at me saying, Sunil, entrepreneurship, Sunil, entrepreneurship. And finally, the dam had to break, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I quit engineering and I lost my relationship with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't speak to me after that.
Wow.
But I followed what I was naturally really meant to do. And if you want stats, I had 6 ventures after that totaled $20 million in revenues. Wow. Before I started moving into management consulting, because others started to find out what I was doing. And I started helping like football teams, and there was another restaurant and some other companies. And I got into the sort of the Fortune 50s with Citibank and SAP and all that. So some bigger firms had figured out what I was doing and wanted me to help consult for them. And then I got a real big chance to go to Silicon Valley. There's this huge contract, and the terms of the contract start changing. And then I phoned down to the HR and their legal team saying, what's going on? Because I needed a special visa to work in the US as a consultant.
Right.
And what they were saying was just not jiving with my intuition. I got these these signals, these red flags are going on, but the amount of money that they're paying me was so big that I ignored those intuitive signals. And I went down there and they didn't pay me. I spent every single penny to go down there, and I came back to Canada with 23 cents in my bank account. Wow. And I was about to be married. Luckily, my wife was in India at the time. And I remember driving up to the US-Canada border, coming back to Calgary, Canada, where I was from. And she's phoning saying, how are things going? And I said, yeah, great. I'm just going to settle back in Calgary and go on to the next journey. And here I didn't even know where I was going to sleep that night. And so that's again influenced by other people who I should have avoided. And perhaps the most devastating out of all of them, as I reflected back, was when I was in engineering. I was doing some personal coaching at the time, and I had a friend of mine who was being stalked, and she said, Sunil, I really need some advice. And I had a number of friends who I was supposed to go for beers with that afternoon. And they said, come on, Sunil, you can let's just go for beers. Like, you can do that later. Yeah. And I allowed them to basically override my intuitive signal as saying, Sunil, meet with her that afternoon, because I really didn't have anything. I'm going to go for beers with these guys, or I'm going to meet with her. Right. And I decided to go for beers. And the very next day, that same guy walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head.
What?
And she died. Wow. Because I ignored my intuition. Wow. And when I started reflecting back on all these things, these failures that I had gone through, I started to think, okay, here I'm at 5 years old. My intuition is so strong and so loud. Here I'm now ignoring. I got to figure out why. And this is where I took a real deep dive. I spent over 10,000 hours on research. And so I was just before the research phase, I'm thinking, okay, who do I know that I can give me a sort of a scientific explanation of this thing called intuition? Because everything at that time was coming from the cosmos, meditation. And for me, that didn't really resonate. For other people, absolutely. If that works for you, for sure. Yeah. But it didn't really resonate with me. I couldn't latch onto it. I didn't think that's how it worked for me. So I was always on this search for a definition. I looked online and none of the formal dictionaries worked. Right. And I remember there's this neurologist that I had in my circle of friends. And so I approached him and I said, hey, Dr. Rathbone, let's can I talk to you about intuition? And he says, sure. And so I met him at the hospital, and I honestly thought this is like going to be like a 30-second or 1-minute conversation. And I turned on the cameras and I said, does intuition exist? And he goes, it absolutely exists. We all have a sixth sense. He uses it for his patients. He kind of went through the science between how it's your neurons are connected. There's more in the gut area than it is. And it sometimes short circuits the brain even when it has these gut reactions, as we say.
Yeah.
And the other thing he was saying is that more and more neuroscience research is coming out that was showing that intuition acts much earlier than we are actually consciously aware of. And so I'm going away from this interview going, wow. So, okay, where is this research?
Right.
And so I go to an academic database. I type in the word intuition, and I'm thinking, maybe there's going to be 15, 20 articles, 53,000 articles on intuition since 1990. And when I look at intuition and relationships, close to 2/3 of them have to do with the intertwining of intuition and relationships. So that told me that A, intuition is really important, and B, relationships have a huge deal when it comes to intuition and who you surround yourself with. And so now I've got all this data and research. And what was really interesting is when I reflected back to when I was 5, I was thinking, okay, I had this voice when I was 5. Perhaps we're born with intuition. And lo and behold, there's this research paper that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive capabilities, or this paper calls it intuitive physics. And then with Dr. Rathbone saying that neuroscience research showing that's much earlier than we're consciously aware of, there's 2 papers that show that intuition happens on average 7 to 10 seconds before we actually are consciously aware of making a decision. And so that's how quick that it acts. Wow. And when it comes to trust, when you're trusting other people, that acts in under 14 seconds. So in 14 seconds or less, you're able to look at someone and monitor his or her actions, the twitches, their body language, the tone. And in under 14 seconds, you can know if that person is trustworthy or not. And intuition acts like it's like a camera. So it's always taking pictures, right? So somebody can come in and it could be a trusting relationship early in the relationship, but if they change, your intuition is watching these changes. And what it's watching for is to see, okay, do the value sets that I have match the value sets of these other people? And when your intuition notices that those value sets are far apart, that it becomes really uncomfortable, or it's going to start to change me or who I am, it's going to start sending some warning signals saying, you better let this person go. Wow. And the problem is we're too emotionally attached that we don't do that. And so we'll get into fear and how fear is kind of our best friend. But one of the things that I ended up doing is that I looked at, and the other research that was there was that your intuition hits the amygdala, which is the base part. That's a primitive part of your brain. Okay. It's fight or flight. So
is this what they call the reptile brain?
Is that exactly the reptilian brain? So and that's why there was no definition that really worked with me, is because in that area there's no capacity for language. So when intuition hits, we describe intuition in our own way. So let's say, Oscar, for you, if it is coming from the cosmos, that's great. That's what you think. If I see it as art and science, blend of art and science, because that's how I see it, that's perfect. If somebody sees it, it's like voices from God, fantastic. It's not for any of us to judge how somebody else sees it. It's how we define intuition our own way, how we describe it in our own way, the way that it works for us. And this is really, really important, because a lot of times we gravitate to things on the internet, like I trust my gut feeling. I always listen to that voice, and that's great. But are those all the signals that you have? Right. And so when I looked at intuition a little further, I wanted to see how did it impact people. And so I interviewed over 1,000 people, and this is where I got these signals. And so these signals, there's 2 characteristics from them. One, we talked about the uniqueness because of the definition. And there's the other thing is that there's positive signals and negative signals. So the positive signals are the ones that tell you that you're moving forward. And if you look at how unique those may be, there's one. So some people, like for me, the dots connect. There's a feeling of flow. And there was this one CEO who actually sees omens. So in his business, if he's looking to hire someone or do a business deal with another entity, or he's bringing on another vendor,
Right.
and this omen pops up, that's a signal that he needs to say yes to whatever he's doing. And that omen has been responsible for him running 2 multi-million-dollar organizations under his belt.
Wow.
And so this is how unique these signals are. And on the negative intuitive signals, again, these are sort of the warning signs. And the characteristics, the really important characteristics of intuition, the negative signals that people need to really realize, is that they actually start very subtle in nature. So Oprah calls it a whisper. And as you start to ignore those subtle intuitive signals, they start to get louder and louder and louder until you can no longer ignore them anymore. And so there was one entrepreneur I was actually interviewing, and he says, Sunil, like, nobody's really asked me about intuitive signals. Like, this is the first time somebody's asked me. It's it's like, Oscar, let's go for a latte. What are your intuitive signals? Like, it's not really a common question people get asked. And he says, Sunil, like, I'm not sure what these signals are, but let's keep talking and perhaps it'll come up. And when we started to talk about his failures that he had in the ventures that he ran for the wrong reasons, like money or fame, it didn't come from within him. As soon as he starts to describe it, he starts grabbing his left earlobe. And he just says, oh my God, Sunil, I just realized what my negative intuitive signal is my left earlobe pulsates with heat. And so he now remembers when he used to get into those ventures, he couldn't figure out why his left earlobe started pulsating with heat. And then when he's describing these ventures to his wife, same thing happened. And so the problem that we get into is we've never taken the time to see what our inventory of signals are. And because we think about gut feeling and we talk about voice and everybody's talking about the same thing, how do you know that that's the first feeling or the intuitive signal? And so let's say, Oscar, you and I do it. Let's say if we do an exercise and let's say we both agree to take some time to figure out what our inventory of signals are. And let's say you do the homework and I'm lazy. You figure out that you get a gut feeling, and we'll just say it's a gut feeling. And that for you is signal number one. So anytime you enter anything that your intuition is going to warn you about, you get a slight anxiousness in your gut. And for you, that's signal number one. And let's say I'm lazy enough and I assume that gut feeling is also my signal number one. But if my gut signal is actually signal number 3, not 1, then every single time it comes up, it's signal number 3, which means I've missed signal number 1 and signal number 2.
It's more amplified.
It is more amplified. And because I've missed those first 2 signals, those first 2 warnings, that means that I've already made 2 decisions that I've ignored. And so those 2 decisions could be me just simply stubbing my toe on a door, or it could be headed towards bankruptcy. So you just don't know.
So it's something that's very different depending on who you are.
Absolutely. Because remember, these are your experiences. These are what you've been through in life. These are your intuitive signals. This is very unique to you. So your inventory of positive and negative signals are going to be very different than others. There are going to be some common ones, like you could have that voice, you could have that gut feeling, but for you, that could be in a personal situation. For me, it could be a professional situation, and it could be with certain people. So that's how unique it is. So you just cannot gravitate around just waiting for this voice to occur, because that could be signal number 5, which means every single time your voice comes, you made 4 bad decisions every single time. And again, you don't know what the veracity of those 4 decisions are. What's the chain of bad decisions you've made, right? And some are okay and you've escaped it and like, phew, or you don't realize it, or others, you're like, oh my God, what the hell just happened here? And it's just down to those 4 signals again, right? And you just haven't taken the time to research. And the other thing I found was that there's actually 4 types of intuition. Did you have a question, Oscar?
Well, I did, but I kind of want you to finish this because I think it's going to feed into my question. So go ahead, and then we'll dive into that.
Sure, yeah, yeah, no problem. And so the other thing I found out is that these signals are actually really, really packed with tons of information, because there's actually 4 types of intuition that feed into the giving you the signal. And the best way I can describe these 4 types of intuition is through a case study of taking a non-believer into a believer. So one of my very, very first interviews was a fellow by the name of John Rothschild. And this guy was an investment banker. So data, Excel spreadsheets, that's the only thing that ran his entire life.
Wow.
And so when I'm I give him a call and say, hey, John, listen, I want to talk to you about intuition. And he goes, what? Yeah, I want to talk to you intuition. Go, oh, Sunil, man, like, I don't know what we're going to talk about, but listen, I haven't seen you for a while. Why don't you come down? I'll give you an hour.
Yeah.
And I'll book the boardroom and we'll go from there. And I said, okay. And so I'm wondering, okay, I don't know how this is going to go. But anyways, I went down there, I set up the camera crew with the camera, and I turn on the camera and I start telling him about intuition. And he says, yeah, Sunil, yeah, you know what? Intuition just doesn't exist. And I told him about the Omen, the CEO that ran 2 multi-million-dollar organizations with this Omen. And he goes, yeah, omens, spiritual, like voices.
It was a little too woo-woo for him.
It was way too woo-woo for him. And he's saying, yeah, I'd like to meet that guy. I'd like to shake his hand. But look, Sunil, let's get down to brass tacks here. Every decision is based on your learning and experience. And so now I'm going to start educating him on the 4 types. And one of the 4 types is called experiential intuition. So if you look at your brain, or like an iceberg, 90% is the subconscious below the water, and the 10% is the conscious above water. So the 10% is the left brain, right brain stuff that we keep talking about. But the subconscious area is where all your memories are stored, your experiences are stored, your learning is stored. So when you're born, you have 5,000 to 6,000 events per day. When you're older, 28 to 35,000 events per day, which is backed by research. Every single piece of that learning and experience, both good and bad, both direct and indirect, so from other people, and formal and informal, so college, school, and street smarts, every day, all those pieces of information are going into the subconscious area of your brain. So when you get a signal that's telling you about a decision you're about to make, it's picking up on trillions and trillions and trillions of data points you have personally accumulated. So when you get a signal to say, this is the decision you need to take, that's saying that somewhere in your past, Oscar, you've done this. You've had the skill sets. You've been able to do this. It worked out well for you. That's why I'm giving you a positive signal. And the contrary is true. If it gives you a negative signal, it's saying, Oscar, you've tried something like this. It may not be directly like that, but something like this in your past you've taken and it didn't turn out well. And so I'm telling you, it's not going to turn out well again. And so that's how packed these signals are with just that one type. And so what I was telling John is that sometimes your intuition can actually have you go against your data. And he goes, wow, Sunil, that's really interesting. I have an example of that. And I said, well, please tell. And so John was in the industry of putting in franchises.
Okay.
And so like a McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Wendy's, that kind of stuff. And so a franchise location he used a benchmarking system. So only a 9 out of 10 or higher is when they would put a franchise. They look at things like demographics, traffic patterns, and development in that area. There's this really dilapidated area of Toronto, Canada. And his team looked at it and they measured it as a 5.5 out of 10. And so he went to go to that site. And now we're getting to the second of the 4 called situational intuition. He looks at the situation and he goes, huh. And he goes, perhaps my intuition. Now John's starting to kind of understand what intuition is. Perhaps my intuition is saying that we should put a location here. And so he goes against his team's advice and he puts a location there. And that ended up being one of the most profitable franchise brands called the Beer Market under his whole portfolio that he had. And so now John's starting to get it a little bit. And then his purpose changes. So he wanted to no longer be an investment banker. He now wanted to go run a business himself. And so the third of the 4 is called relational intuition. And what relational intuition does is it filters your relationships so that the only people that you really kind of listen to or you really want around you are the ones who really care about where you want to go. And so all the people in his circle who are concerned about money, fame, ego, security, high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines.
Yeah.
All of them said, John, you're nuts.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing? And there's only one person that actually asked him why, and that was his wife.
Wow.
And so his wife says, John, why do you want to do this? And now this is what John said after telling me 45 minutes earlier that this thing does not exist. Now he's saying, Sunil, sometimes you can have all the data in the world, but you have to trust your intuition. And I looked at my wife and I said, this just feels right. There's the intuitive signal. Mm-hmm. And now the fourth of the four is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the one that takes that signal and turns it into a decision. Mm-hmm. And so you would think that somebody who's made $3 to $4 million a year as an investment banker is going to pick a business to run that has healthy balance sheet, strong revenues, and excellent cash flows. Mm-hmm. Not his intuition. His intuition says, you're going to run a tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And he does. He quits his $3 to $4 million a year, starts from ground zero or less, and he walks into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant happened to be Eastside Mario's location number 1. And over the next 20 years, he grew that into $2 billion.
Wow.
Before he retired. All because it felt right. And that's the power of intuition.
Wow. Wow. I kind of have a little like goosebumps just because there's so much to unpack. And it's, as I'm hearing you speak, which I love hearing you because you're just so passionate about the subject, and just from you reflecting on your past experiences, that it kind of makes me wonder where does it come from? Right. We talked about how, there's scientific studies that show babies even have it. Right. Yep. So is it something that is passed down through genetics? Is it, nature versus nurture? And I think you kind of went into that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, how can we start getting more in tune with our intuition? Because sometimes, from personal experience, you get a gut feeling of it's good versus bad. But I also know you mentioned fear. And sometimes fear is a little bit scary, which can give a bad feeling. However, a lot of times when I come across a fear obstacle and I end up taking that leap, it ends up working out tremendously well for me. Right. So I know I kind of just asked a lot of questions here, but I guess if we can kind of start with, where does it actually come from? Right. How does it begin?
Yeah. And so now this is where you have to be comfortable with where you want to take the definition and where you want to take the understanding. And this is why this has to be something that you believe in. So if you believe it comes from generations down, I had a Buddhist monk that talked about that, where it's generational. And I had a couple of podcast guests that talked about it coming from generations. I can't recall the other one. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, and for me, if somebody's going to say that, I generally want to have some kind of study that might say, yeah, that's right. And if you look at, there was a study done with mice. And what they did was that every time they went to this particular flower that it was like smelled like almond, and they would shock these mice on the floor that they were standing on. And so every time that these mice would approach this flower, they'd get shocked. And so what happened is that when these mice had babies, baby mice, what they found is that every time the baby mice went to this flower, with no shocking, they would feel the shock on their feet. Wow. So this is something, it's called epigenetics. Mm-hmm. And so this is where if you take some stimuli, that stimuli gets passed down through the genes into the next generation and then the next generation. So if you were to use that analogy with that study and we take intuition, then intuition epigenetically would be carried down from generation to generation. But if I talked to that, if I told John Rothschild about that, he'd say, "Oh my God, Sunil, have you seen a doctor? Yeah. Like you're talking about omens, you're talking about things passed down from generation from Buddhist monks. Mm-hmm. He would think I'm nuts." Right. So for John, once I explained how it worked through his experience, his lens, his signals, it made sense to him. He may still think it's just based on learned experience and data from his past. Mm-hmm. And that's as far as he wants to go. I'm fine with that, because the whole goal of me in intuitionology is to say, you have intuition. Here are your signals. You need to do your homework on the signals, and then you can make the right decision moving forward. And so, coming back to your question on why kind of fear, and so the first thing we have to do is we want to take a look at the signals that we have. And so I've gone, I've already talked about some of the uniqueness of the signals, but how many of us have actually taken a step back and said, okay, what were my good decisions that I made, and how did it feel like in that moment? Because we don't do that, right? And this is what Intuitionology Project is all about. And then you look at your the bad experiences that you had, and say, okay, what did it feel like in that moment? Because those are the signals. And in particular with the bad ones, you have to say, okay, was that the first trigger, or was that trigger number 3? And what was the decision before that that led to this bad decision, and the one before that? And so I've got a 7-day challenge on intuitionology.com that leads people through that, where they take a problem that they haven't been able to solve in the past, and they've done it because they've ignored their intuition. That's why it's a problem. And so they look at their inventory of positive and negative signals in a very specific way. Negative signals first, then positive signals, because before you move on, if you're making a decision later on to solve that problem that's not right, your negative intuitive signal is going to say, Sunil, come on now. You know that that's not a process you should be putting in place. And so at the end of the 7 days, people end up solving their problem. And I had one fellow who actually goes through the 7-day challenge with you if you decide to take it. And he actually sold his house in 7 days. He went from minus $20,000 with a real estate guy, real estate woman who threw a card in his face. And normally before he would have said, yep, I'm going to, she's saying that's all I'm going to get for my house. Yes, I believe her. I'm going to sign. And then 7 days later, because his intuition was saying, I don't trust this person, he waits, he listens to the right people, and he had a bidding war on the 7th day, and he ended up settling at 50,000 over asking. And the other person who goes through this with you is someone who actually walked into an apartment after her boyfriend had murdered their best friend in the bathtub. She walks in, he closes the door behind her, locks it, puts a knife to her back, and says, "You're next. I might as well go away for one murder. Might as well make it two."
Yeah.
And so her intuition calms her down, and she gets assaulted, choked. She's asked to wipe the blood, but her intuition's waiting for that moment to escape, and finds it. She runs 18 flights down, calls 911. Apparently he came back down to look for her, and she missed him by seconds. And she used the 7-day challenge to overcome PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And so when she was able to go through the 7 days and think, okay, here's my positive signals, here's my negative signals, I now understand what it is. I'm now able to measure my intuition, which is what I do in the 7 days. Now she uses her signals to see, okay, who do I trust and who I not trust? And before that, she couldn't even get out of her apartment without looking all over the place. She couldn't go to the gym, where that was her solace. She couldn't go walking. And after the 7 days, she was comfortable trusting the right people and listening to the right people so that she can finally have a life. That's just 7 days, right? So when you take that time to understand what your signals are, then this is what happens. And you start stripping away those people that really aren't there for you. There's so many that they don't care about you. They care about you listening to them.
Right.
And so this is where the fear comes in, because when you stop living through the values of other people and their opinions and what society wants and all that crap, and showing up for other, making me look good because I want to show you all that I'm better than you guys. When you live your life through their lens, through their values, you forget yours. And your intuitive signals are saying, listen, Oscar, I'm telling you, make the decision, but you're so concentrated on somebody else's opinion or what they think of you that you've missed the whole signal.
How hard is it? Let's say someone's, 40, 50, 60 years old. How hard is it to essentially rewire that intuition process?
It's instant. Okay. It's instant. And the reason is, and this is where fear is your best friend. And so let's sort of get into sort of this fear thing. The reason why fear is your best friend is because, remember, your intuition exists in your amygdala, right? And all it knows is you're going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or you're not. That's all it knows, right? It's binary.
Mhm.
So if there's no saber-toothed tiger coming around the bush, then the only fear that's left is the fear of change, fear of failure, fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And the thing with that is because you've lived so long living through the lens of other people, living for yourself is scary. But don't forget that fear is also starts with it's accompanied by a positive intuitive signal
Mhm.
because you've done the homework. And from a neuroscience perspective, when you have that kind of fear, that jolt, that you're going in a new direction, what happens from a neuroscience perspective, your neurons are actually separating themselves from the old pathways. And they're saying, Oscar, Sunil, show me a new path. And the problem is we go back to the old way of doing things, and it cements back, those paths cement again.
Yeah.
Those new pathways are not going to change unless you make the change, unless you take action.
Mm.
And a very good example of this is a case study with Vin Jiang. So he's an international keynote speaker. He was an international musician. And back in 2016, this guy's career was on absolute fire. This guy was speaking to over 100,000 people on 80 stages, and for living downtown LA, Mercedes-Benz,
Yeah.
brands, hanging around this clique of people. And his intuition saying, boy, you got to change, man.
Mhm.
So he goes to New Zealand, and he starts putting up, he tells his wife, I got to fix this. No cell phone service. Take some markers and some paper and a book. And he goes, and he starts putting up the values on the wall. And he goes, oh my God, like these things are just staring back at him and
Mhm.
saying, this is what my wife wants. This is what my career wants. This is what my manager wants. This is what my customers and clients want.
Mhm.
Where the hell is Vin? Not one of these values speaks to who I am.
Mhm.
So he takes them down. He puts up the values that he wants, how he's going to live. And he said that what he thought was going to be cathartic, what was going to be freeing, what was going to be so liberating, he's saying was so frightening, because for the first time in his life, he's given himself permission to live for himself. And so he came away from New Zealand ready to take action, and he falls back to the same old way of doing things for 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months later, his parents come up from Australia, and he's got a Vietnamese background. His mom pulls him aside, and she says, there's a saying in Vietnamese that when you hang around squid, you're going to get some ink on you. And she says, you're hanging around a lot of squid. This is not my boy.
Yeah.
And it hit him. And so 6 months later, he says, you're right. He gets rid of the friends, sells his downtown LA apartment, moves to the suburbs, gets the minivan, and he's happy. And he says, if I want to leave my speaking career, I'll do it. If I no longer love my wife, I'll tell her I don't love my wife, because I need to live life for myself.
Mhm.
And the thing that I talked to him in my podcast interview was that there's something called opportunity cost. And opportunity cost it's the cost, not only just the cost of not doing something, but it's also the cost of the time you wasted of not doing the right thing.
Mhm.
And so in Vin Jiang's case, he wasted 6 months of his life not doing the right thing. But what I told him is that it's not just the 6 months of not living your life through your values, but it's also the 6 months that you wasted not actually living your life
Mhm.
how you wanted.
Yeah.
So you've actually lost a full year of your life. And if you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year, how many people did you leave behind?
Wow.
How many people didn't you help?
Mhm.
And he said, Sunil, I've never, ever thought about it like that.
Wow.
And so when we're confronted with fear, the big thing from a neuroscience perspective, neurons are saying, take action. You've got the positive signal. And another great case study is David Dame. So David Dame has cerebral palsy.
Mhm.
He's been in a wheelchair all his life. And he used to go on these beaches, and he'd always be sitting in the back, in the wheelchair, and saying, what if? There's always what if.
Yeah.
And the one time he says, Sunil, he was saying, I went on this vacation a couple of years ago, and finally I'm going to turn that what if into a reality.
Mhm.
And he gets his friends and his wife to wheel him up onto the beach, right to where he's dreamed of the water and the sand caressing his
Yeah.
toes. And he stands up and it's happening. And he falls flat on his face. And then the fear starts,
Mhm.
the questioning, the embarrassment. What are they going to think?
Yeah.
Who else is looking? And he said, Sunil, look, there's two things I can do at that exact moment. The first thing is I can succumb to that fear and I
Mhm.
can sit back in my wheelchair and forever regret turning my dream into reality. I am right here.
Mhm.
Or I can listen to my intuitive signals that are saying, Dave, take a step and then take another step. Forget about how far, just take a step. And so he says he listens to his intuitive signals, takes a step into the ocean, being helped by his friends.
Right.
And then the water gets up to his chin. And then he turns around and he was blown away by how far he came. So that's how you live your life. When you say you're living life in the present moment,
Mhm.
that's what it actually means. It doesn't mean a theme on social media. It doesn't mean something you can share around a campfire. It means you sit, listen to the signals, you take a step and you walk that step and you take the next step. And when you do that, living in the present moment with your intuition right beside you, who strip the people that don't matter, that's when you find success. And that's how you meet your goals. And that's how you live intrinsically happy. And that's why you will never, ever regret when you're 65 or 80 that you've never done what you wanted to do, because you're not regretting what you're doing today. And so many people of us think, what if, what if, what if? And they're 80 years old or 60 years old or what have you. What if today?
Mhm.
What
Now?
if today? What if right now? And how many people are actually going to take action? And the stats will shock you. The stats will absolutely shock you.
I do want to ask, what would you say to, the listeners who, they're listening to this and all this sounds amazing and they're like, you know what, I want to do it. But we've talked a little bit about relationships,
Yep.
and there's people in their life who, may or may not be the right person to be there, right? Maybe they have kids or business partners or something like that. How do you, what advice would you give them in order to handle that, to navigate that, so that way they can get closer to using that intuition? Because I know that's going to be a lot of fear for a lot of individuals out there.
Yeah. So this is where you gotta really kind of manage, okay, what can you do and what's realistic when it comes to your relationship, and how much of that is that you're just making excuses.
Right.
There are some people that you just absolutely have to cut off because they're so caustic to you. And because you have that emotional connection, when you're making a decision that's very emotional in nature,
Mhm.
you're not balancing so the emotion and logic, right? So your intuition already had, because of experiential intuition, has all that logic built into it because of your past experience. It knows what you want. But when you cloud that with over emotion, those signals that are stuck at the base of your skull are not coming through because you're short circuiting them, saying, no, I need to stay with that person.
Mhm.
So if you're in a relationship, for example, there's family, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut them out. It just may mean that you have to move away from them emotionally. You need to move farther and farther away from them. If it's a business partner, you got to take a look at the legal ramifications of doing that. And maybe you got to have that discussion. But if it's a business partner that's not working, which happens in 95% of the cases,
Mhm.
then that person is taking away from you. Maybe you close down the business and you do it again, right? And if you're thinking, well, how can I do it again? They can't take away what's in between your two ears. Your business is based on your purpose and why you are doing it. And that's why people buy from you. That's why employees want to work for you, is because why are you doing that business? And
Mhm.
if your partner is not vested in that same purpose, cut them out, cut her out, because that purpose is why you're going to, and that's something I called intuitive branding, because remember, the intuition of others is going to trust you in under 14 seconds. And if they don't trust your partner, they're not going to buy from you, no matter how many hours you put into it.
True.
So you got to manage the relationships, and sometimes you just got to make the hard decision.
Mhm.
And it just happens, right? And so you got to manage the relationship, manage the family, look at what's all involved, especially if there's family and there's kids.
Mhm.
But ultimately, you got to make a decision: as do you really want to stay with that person, or not. And what happens is when you get rid of those, and don't forget there's fear, but when you get rid of those other people, you start bringing in others that are really a foundation of support for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you reflect back, you're going to say, wow, I'm so glad I made that decision. And I remember speaking at a college. And so I was speaking to the administrative staff at this college. And when I shared that thing about the same topic, I noticed that there were a number of people that started crying and their faces started getting flushed because they were able to attach what I was talking to something that was really happening in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this one girl, very particular, she was just crying like crazy, and we started giving her Kleenexes. And 3 weeks later, I got an email from her saying, Sunil, thank you so much, because there was someone that was coming in the way of her 10-year marriage with her husband. And it was always, that person was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time, she got the courage to cut that person out of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And she said it was tough.
Yeah.
But when she did, the marriage just took on a totally different level between her and her husband. The communication increased. And yeah, that's that fear.
Mm-hmm.
That's really tough. So that has to be managed, but you got to make that decision. And there are so many others that will help support you. Those are the ones that you need to surround yourself with.
Yeah.
So it is tough, but don't forget, do the homework on those signals, because those signals will tell you how far to cut. That when you're thinking about the decision, should I just spend a little bit more time just moving them away? Mm-hmm. You can sit back and think about, what are the signals that are telling me? Mm-hmm. If the signals are saying, when I think about just maybe moving away from them, that's great. I get a positive signal. That's your action. But if you can go back and your intuition is reminding you of the times that this person made you feel like crap, this person starts devaluing you, this person makes you feel worthless, mm-hmm. That's a hard no. And that is, you're gone.
Yeah.
And I'll worry about the ramifications later. And again, that springboards you, because again, opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. It's not only just the time you're wasting with that other person, mm-hmm. but now you've eliminated that. Plus you're making time for yourself. And so you're actually doubling your way to move forward. You're doubling your ability to spring forward. And so that's what happens. And if we all look at ourselves, I mean, we both have probably spoken to hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people personally. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 people that I can rely on, 2 that I can rely on, that they'll be with me throughout. And that's going to be fluid. Mm-hmm. Because as there's somebody else's value may change, and I can't help if they don't trust their intuition. And when my intuition tells me that and this has just happened about 3-4 years ago, I had a good set of friends. We were really close. We were at each other's place like 3-4 times a week. Yeah. And I don't know what changed, but something changed. And I saw some behaviors. My intuition saw some behaviors that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. And then I let my intuition saying, you got to get rid of them. I gave this person 4th or 5th chances, because intuition always gives second chances. Mm-hmm. But sure enough, I saw the same behavior, and I just said, no, I'm sorry. I cannot surround my kids and my family with people like that have values that have changed so much that they're away from my values. Mm-hmm. And they were gone. But as soon as they were gone, 3 or 4 other friends came up that were just wholesome people. We're such a clique now, this group of friends. And of that group of friends, I've got 2 that are just amazing, that I can come to them for anything. Wow. And I know that they've got my back through thick and thin. Now, and so you go from hundreds of thousands of people to 2, mm-hmm. but that's all you need. That's all you need, right? And every single day is a great day for me. And I'm telling that to my kids. And they're understanding about intuitive signals. They're understanding about what it means to live a life on, based on their intuition. And so my 14-year-old, if you look at the paintings behind me, mm-hmm. so she's actually running an official nonprofit business. Wow. And she's raised over $30,000 by selling these paintings to raise money for disabilities and illnesses. Wow. Because of her purpose. That's how people get drawn to her. And she just sold another original a couple of days ago, post-COVID. It was her first post-COVID original sale, because everybody else's other donations are prints. But because of her purpose, this 14-year-old girl, mm-hmm. is that's what people are drawn to. They're drawn to her story. She has her own podcast series. Wow. People are saying no to me because she's cuter. She's cuter. I'm not sure what that means. But and you know, it takes me sometimes months to book some of these speakers. And for my 2 podcast series I have, and for her, it's like, yeah, I'm available next week. Like, oh my God. So, but I mean, as funny as that seems, that's what happens when you use it, but put the power of intuition in kids' hands. But it can stop. It can happen at any time. I mean, you look at Colonel Sanders, 65, almost broke.
Yep.
His wife about to leave him, goes door to door to sell chicken recipes, and by 86, he's a billionaire.
Yeah.
Right? Because people trusted him.
Wow.
And so you don't need to be 14-year-olds. You don't need to be 50-year-olds. You can be 65. You can be 80. It doesn't matter. The main thing is your intuition you need to act on your intuition today.
Boom.
Because the signals have been built from all your experiences. So stop making excuses.
I love it. And, you know, as we're getting to the top of the hour here, one question that I did have is, when it comes to intuition, is it something that you can grow and develop? Is it something that you just get more in tune with? Does intuition have a cap in terms of its ability?
No. So every experience you have is a building on it, right? And so it's constantly going. So every experience you have, formal and informal, every failure you've had or you may have, it's a learning lesson, right? So your intuition is going to say, oh, you failed there. Oh, this was a hurdle. I'm going to park that in the subconscious area of the brain. So the next time you make that mistake, I'm going to send you a subtle negative signal saying, don't do that again. And the problem is,
we should be exposing ourselves to more than.
Yes. The more experiences, the better. And take stock of what you already have. You'd be surprised when you look back and you tell your stories of the stuff that you've done and some of the bold decisions you made, however minute. You'd be surprised, say, wow, I had a lot of courage back then. Wow, I couldn't believe I made that type of decision. So when you doubt yourself today, look back at those decisions, say, you're no different. You're the same person. You've just allowed other people to numb who you are. And so, gain more experiences. It's always learning. Get a great mentor that invest in a mentor, invest in things you want to do, go for hikes, teach others, do good in this world. Right. And that stuff adds to everything around you. And that's where you build your purpose. And it starts at any time. So, and it's constantly learning. And so, it's always learning.
I love it. Sunil, this was an amazing podcast. Thank you so much. If I wanted to go and actually try out your 7-day challenge, if I wanted to know or purchase your books or know more about you, where can I go?
Yep. You can go to intuitionology.com where there's a 7-day challenge there. And then that'll take you through that. And there's an ebook that I give you for free in that 7-day challenge. And if you go to sunilgodse.com, there's a link for my books. I think there's a link to both of those websites. But so the Intuitionology is more for your relationships around you personally. And if you go to sunilgodse.com, that's where you can see intuitive branding. And this is where trusting is really important. And you can get my books there as well. So a couple of ways that I can help you either on the personal side or even on the business front. Perfect.
Now, before we end, what's the next step for you? Where do you want to take, Intuitionology, if you will?
Yeah. So Intuitionology, so I'm helping around with the coaching itself. And so that's going well with the one-on-ones, and with intuitive branding. My team and I are working, looking at boot camps, and boot camps really kind of help in who you are, what you do internally with your employees, and what you do externally with your customers. And when you earn the trust of them and you're comfortable with yourself and with your intuition, the marketplace loves you. And so now you have people wanting to buy from you. You got people wanting to work for you. And so that's how you crush the competition. And it happens in under 14 seconds. On the personal side, there's always the one-on-one coaching. So once they're done that, there's a course that they can take if they want to make an investment themselves. And then after that, if they want more immediate needs, then there's coaching. And then I use things like hypnotherapy, and we work on their signals a little deeper. And we look at specific relationships and tactics on how to get rid of them. So.
Wow. Amazing. Sunil, thank you again so much for giving us your time, giving us your insight, a look into the crazy intuition scenarios that happen in your life. But thank you for shedding a light into something that many of us feel in the back of our heads come to light, and actually now it's a real thing. And so I encourage anyone to, if you love this, which I know I will, head over and try out that 7-day challenge, so that way we can get more in touch with our own intuitions and make better decisions. All right, Sunil.
Thank you very much. That was great. I appreciate it.